People, we've been here all morning long here at 38th in Chicago, now known by many as George Floyd Square, because of that deadly encounter he had with Minneapolis police over here in front of Cup Foods. It's been a really quiet, peaceful day. People have been coming. I've seen so many coming over here, leaving flowers in the middle of this intersection. I've seen many tears, many people crying. I'd say really nobody knew what to expect from the people I talked to. Nobody knew what would happen, but one thing for sure, nobody thought that this would happen this quickly, that we would have a verdict returned this quickly. I talked with one woman who said she'd been a juror in another unrelated murder case, and she just spoke to me about how much pressure is on the jurors in those situations, and she said she really didn't know what to expect. So more people starting to show up here now. There is a candlelight vigil planned for later this afternoon, and it'll be really interesting to see just how much of a turnout there is now for that after we learn what the jurors have decided here.
All right, Babs, thank you. We know you'll be there throughout the evening. We appreciate you. Paul Bloom, as we said earlier, has been covering this trial minute by minute, day by day. He has all the details of that crammed in his head over the course of all that's gone on, the videos, Paul, the testimony, it's all there for you. But it's always good to have somebody by your side to discuss, especially during this time when we know the verdict is in. We know what the jury has had before them with all that evidence and all that testimony from those 45 witnesses. What is the sense for when a jury comes back this soon, and we all have heard the theory, but what is the sense on a day like this with about 10 hours of deliberation from this jury?
Well, certainly the gut feeling is a positive for the state, at least on a couple of counts. I do have Ryan Pasiga, the criminal defense attorney, going to join me in a quick second as Russ pans over. I do just want to point out we do kind of have a bird's eye view. I know you can't really see down below, but definitely some activity picking up down here as crowds descend on the government center complex. I noticed traffic just picking up beneath us, busier streets below. Downtown had really been quiet, kind of ghost town-like, but clearly the news of this verdict has changed the dynamic here as people come downtown to be close to this historic reading of a verdict. And Ryan has already joined me, so I want to kind of jump off. Probably our viewers are joining us, so I want to maybe reset a little bit. But Randy had asked me about 10 hours of deliberations and who that likely favors in terms of just a gut reaction. We talked earlier. It really is the state here, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems to be the state in a case like this. It's been a long trial, and usually the longer a trial goes, the longer the deliberations are. And the old adage is if it's a quick verdict, it's usually a guilty verdict, unless you can just tell by seeing the trial that it's such a slam dunk for the defense. And that wasn't the case here. I think there were points made on both sides, but people are wondering, is there reasonable doubt with the medical issue here or not? And with this quick of a verdict, with all those witnesses and with all those exhibits and everything, more favorable for the state would be my guess.
Randy had mentioned 45 witnesses testified physically in that courtroom, right? The police chief, witnesses, George Floyd's one-time girlfriend, experts on either side. But I thought Jerry Blackwell's comments during rebuttal yesterday when he said, hey, jury, don't forget about the 46th witness who didn't testify, common sense, kind of going off of this idea that Steve Schlischer had said earlier in the day about believe your eyes with that video. Have some common sense there. We all saw what happened. Go with your gut. At the end of that day, is that what this jury did, is all of the sophisticated arguments? I mean, they're important, but does it really get at the heart of what we all saw in that video?
Yeah, I think so. They've got to apply the law, but right, the jurors know. Jurors are smart, right? They do use their experiences. They do use their common sense. And both lawyers did a good job of presenting their arguments, but I think Blackwell was very effective when he did that. I thought he was going to say the video is the 46th witness, but he went with common sense, and I thought that was powerful. He put an emotional part in there at the end, too, saying that, it wasn't Floyd's heart that was too big, but it was Chauvin's heart that was too small. That has nothing to do with the law, so to speak, but nonetheless, the emotional undertones of this case are very powerful, and you couple that with the video and probably with some of the arguments that Blackwell was talking about when he said nonsense or stories or those sorts of things. And although he was admonished a couple times for that, he was getting his point across that, listen, this seems to be spaghetti against the wall or everything but the kitchen sink kind of ideas with some of these things, and use your experience and common sense. They're desperate moves. They're grasping at straws, and no, let's just hone in on what we know. And I thought that was a powerful rebuttal.
And Ryan, I want to ask you about something that, never came in at trial, but the idea of what's going on in our community right now, particularly Brooklyn Center. Eric Nelson was awfully worried about this jury going home at night right after the shooting of Dante Wright. Do you think what happened there and then the fallout and the curfews that were put in place and the sort of unrest that immediately followed, that had to creep into this jury in terms of, they already knew how big a case this was, but do you think they felt any pressure from outside the building because of what was and what is happening in our community right now?
You'd like to think no, because the ideal juror would be able to avoid that pressure and not let that creep in. But they're human beings, right? The spotlight is here. We can all feel the weight of this thing on our shoulders. Everybody's watching. We're all on edge. These jurors know it. When they left the courthouse Friday, what did they roll by? Personnel vehicles, AR-15s with National Guard members all over downtown here. They come into the trial on Monday morning. What do they see? And then in the meantime, of course, they've got the shooting in Brooklyn Center. We got the guy that shot at the military down in Burnsville across Highway 13. We've got a congresswoman talking about, being potentially having to get confrontational and those sorts of things. So they know it. They know people are on edge, and they know there's going to be a consequence if there's a not guilty verdict. They know that. And how could they not think about that?
And does that eventually set up an appeal for this defense if there is a conviction today on these charges? In
isolation, any of those things, no. There is some precedence that the cumulative effect of pretrial publicity or things that are happening in a trial will invade the jury's province of being the neutral fact finders and finders of the law. If their ability to reach a fair and uncompromised verdict is biased by all of these events happening around them, it infringes on a defendant's Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial, and it could set up an appeal that would have to start a whole new trial if there was a mistrial. Now, are they going to go there? Probably not, ultimately, our Court of Appeals, but is there ever a case example where you've got the perfect storm of all of those things happening and it could call for it? I'd be arguing yes if I was the defense lawyer.
And Ryan, let me just ask you, I'm going to throw you off the spot, maybe on the spot here, just because you office downtown. You have your office is right across the street from the government center. You see the crowds, you've seen the military, you see what's going to happen here today. How anxious just are you as a downtown resident, someone who has made their livelihood down here?
Very. I've had my staff has had go bags since Friday. I told them the minute we get word of a verdict, you're going home, you're going to be safe. I want to get out of here when we're done here. And I'm worried about our building with all of the glass in it, even though we have a fence there, right? I'm worried about the businesses down here. I'm worried about the safety of the citizens. I'm worried about what my office is going to look like in a week when we come back, and whether or not this is going to be a good place and a thriving area with restaurants anymore. Just those sorts of things. Downtown, the fate of downtown is going to turn on how we handle what happens next. And it's not going to be the downtown that we've known. It already isn't right now.
And what happens next, of course, now we're probably about 30 minutes away. Ryan, thank you. I know you want to get going. But again, the verdict about to be read, in the next half hour, at least within the hour. Ryan Pasigi here for joining us. Thank you so much. And we'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
All right. Thank you, Paul. A lot's been said about the jury in this case and the importance of having a diverse jury. I apologize, you're still hearing them there. Having a diverse jury has been really important to a lot of people for obvious reasons. But then we've heard some of the attorneys and the legal analysts say, don't judge a book by its cover. For example, there are two black men who are on this jury who are immigrants and who have lived in the suburbs, are living in the suburbs, and have had no interaction with Minneapolis police. So we've heard both sides of this, and it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out with this diverse jury.
And to think about the pressure that they feel. And if you'll remember back to jury selection, which I thought was really fascinating, because to just hear the voices of people, to not see who they were, but just hear the voices of people talking about how they were feeling, thinking with COVID, with this case, with this last year that we've been living in Minnesota. And some people immediately, you could tell they did not want to be on this jury. They wanted to be out of jury selection so badly. And then other people were very willing. They felt like this was some way that they could serve. And they actually came up with a set of 15, started with 15 because we had 3 alternates, jurors pretty quickly. I know that they pre-screened some of them with some questions, but it's interesting. They have been known by a number since jury selection ended. And eventually we may have some of them talk publicly after this verdict is read. We'll have to wait and see. Hannah, let's talk about the makeup of this jury and where they landed with the number of women and the number of men.
Sure. Yeah. And Kelsey, to your point, I do think it's interesting when we were listening during jury selection, during the voir dire or the questioning process. One of the questions that a lot of these jurors were asked is, does the public pressure of the outcome of this case, is that going to impact your ability to be impartial? And to your point, Kelsey, there were several people who got up on that stand and said, yes, it would be. Yes, I am afraid of what the outcome would be, of the aftermath. To get to this jury of 12 that we have right now, more than 60 people went through that questioning or voir dire process. They came from a pool of more than 300 people, all Hennepin County residents. They got their summons to be in the jury, and then they filled out this 14-page questionnaire talking about how much knowledge do you have of this case? Where do you stand on some social issues? And then it gets whittled down to these 12 individuals. 7 are women, 5 are men. 4 identify as black, 2 identify as multiracial, 6 identify as white, 5 are younger than the age of 40. And just kind of going, this is the comparison here when you look at that racial makeup of the jury compared to Hennepin County, where they're pooled out of. So you can see there's a decent amount of representation on this jury, and we have heard from some of our political experts that they do consider this to be a diverse jury. But then even getting into some of the details of these individuals, you have someone on the jury who's a chemist, you have a nurse, you have someone who works in IT services, in management. They range in age. Some of them talk about the children that they have at home. So actually the state Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson I was talking to today, we talked about, these are still human beings. These are still people. So they are going to be coming with some of their life experiences, some of their background. But the purpose of that voir dire or questioning process is to try and find people who are willing to put aside their own experiences, put aside anything that they've heard about this case, and be as impartial as possible. But again, it's just a reminder, this isn't plugging the facts of this case into a computer for a perfect algorithm. These are just 12 humans, our neighbors, people who live in Hennepin County, who are now handed this immense responsibility to not only interpret the law in a way that's really complicated. They're not lawyers. So they're interpreting that law and then taking, these 3 weeks, 45 witnesses, and trying to decide what are the facts of the case and how do they apply to the law that we have been given. So as we mentioned, in around 25 minutes here, we're expecting their verdict, guilty or not guilty, for those 3 charges.
All right, Hannah, thank you. We want to talk a little bit more about that jury in this time now before the verdict is actually read. There's much been said, as Hannah just pointed out, about the composition of this jury. I want to bring in Mike Bryant, one of our legal analysts. He's been with us from day one as well. Mike, 10 hours of deliberations, not a lot. It does say something, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the things that jury did when it sat down at 4 o'clock yesterday? It spent about 4 hours. Can I assume they eliminated a lot of things in that 4 hours, making today fairly efficient?
Sorry. The first thing they did, sorry about that. The first thing they did was they picked a 4-person. So with the trial that was this long, that probably is pretty obvious to them. There's probably somebody who came up and started to show leadership, and they went to that woman or man that they chose as the 4-person. Then they probably, lots of times jurors will take like an initial vote and go around the table and say, what people think. And depending at that point, they start deciding, what camps they're in or what issues they have to talk about. So, if they did that and last night were able to come to a conclusion, because we know they're unanimous because they came back this fast. They all agreed. So we got 12 votes, all the same. And